What's going on, guys? It's Danny from Fantasy Stock Exchange here, and today I'll be riding solo talking about the murkiest backfield situations in the AFC and breaking them down in terms of fantasy football relevance. For this video, we'll be focusing on the backfields, discussing potential roles, and what the effect of coaching should have from an expectation standpoint from these committees. Today's focus, as you'll soon see, is giving you guys that competitive edge on who we should be targeting from backfields based on ADP and fantasy football for 2021. As you see at the bottom of the screen, make sure to sign up for Underdog Fantasy using our code FSC to get free access to both of our draft guides, Dynasty live right now and season long available on July 15th, as well as a $25 deposit bonus when you sign up. If you guys enjoy content like this and are interested in seeing more, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below and turn notifications on to never miss a beat on an FSC upload. We're on the road to 5,000 subscribers. Let's smash it, y'all. Good? You subscribe? All right, hit that intro. All right, let's start off with the first team of the video, and that's a team that currently is coming off a number 2 overall selection in this past 2021 NFL draft, and that is going to be the New York Jets. So their current depth chart or ADP comparatively to where these running backs are coming off the board are currently, as you guys can see, Michael Carter, first off the board, going right now in the top 90 picks, followed by Tevin Coleman, Ty Johnson, and LaMichael Pirine, respectively. So let's break down the situation a little bit. They recently spent their 4th round pick on Michael Carter to really add him to this backfield and also bring in Tevin Coleman through free agency to really replace that Frank Gore's departure from this past season. This is a team that vacates 209 rushing attempts and 32 targets from last year, as well as 34 combined red zone rushing attempts from last year on what was one of the worst offenses in the league. As you guys can see, Frank Gore, 26 of those attempts. In terms of their offensive line, they made a big splash in this NFL draft, adding Elijah Vera Tucker, who was widely considered the number 1 guard in this class, to an offensive line unit that, while young, showed promising potential down the stretch last year. So you guys can see that on the screen. Add Elijah Vera Tucker to pair on the left side with a very standout rookie from last year in Mekhi Becton. So should be a much improved offensive line. I'm really excited to see how that unit gels going forward, especially with the additions, as we'll get into, of Robert Saleh and that coaching staff coming from the San Francisco 49ers. So let's talk about the coaching tendencies. Because that whole coaching staff is basically coming from the San Francisco 49ers, I'll just go over the coaching tendencies from the Niners from the past 3 years to kind of give you guys a vision as to what the Jets offense may look like from a play calling tendency standpoint. So in 2020, the San Francisco 49ers had a 45% run rate in neutral game scripts, which was the 9th highest rate in the NFL. In 2019, that rate was at 47%, which was the 3rd highest. And in 2018, that rate was at 44%, which was the 10th highest. So this is clearly a run-dominant team when they have the personnel and when they have the real situation to really be able to establish that run game, as we saw in San Francisco over these years. The main thing that really excites me, as we'll get into with Michael Carter, is that 296 of their rushing attempts last year and 78.3% came from off-tackle / outside zone rushing plays, according to Sports Info Solutions. Well, as we'll get into, Michael Carter fits that type of outside wide zone runner to a T. About half of his runs last year at North Carolina, according to Sports Info Solutions, 72 of 156 of them came on those type of plays. So we're talking about a player that was handpicked by this team, early 4th round. As we'll get into, they wanted to use their 3rd rounder on him and fits the system to a T. So I'm very excited to see what they're going to be able to do with that talent, a guy that I had as my RB4 in that class prior to the draft starting. So let's break down these potential roles. Michael Carter. His grades, according to Pro Football Focus, 135.1 PFF elusiveness rating, which was 4th in the class, and 30.22% of his overall runs, he avoided a tackle, which was 6th highest in the class. In addition to this, he's also very adept as a pass catcher, 1.93 yards per route run, 4th in the class, and also averaged 11.4 yards after catch per reception, which is 5th in the class overall. But when you sort it out to players that had 20 or more receptions, was only 2nd behind Travis Etienne. So An obstacle that may get in his way early on transitioning to the NFL is that he was second to last in the class with a 92.9% pass blocking efficiency, which ranks significantly better last season, but is still only the middle pack amongst the class in 2019. However, if he's able to get on the field, if he's able to overcome those pass blocking deficiencies, we're talking about a guy who on 18.47% of his runs eclipsed 15 or more yards, which was number one in the country by far this past year. The way I kind of see this guy is he kind of profiles and reminds me similar to what CEH was coming out of last year. I had a similar grade on both those guys, about a mid-second. Only difference being obviously CEH landed in probably the best situation in the NFL with first-round draft capital. Michael Carter, fourth-round draft capital going to the Jets. So that's the talent, that's the disparity in terms of situation. But in terms of talent, I thought they were very comparable in terms of what they both are able to do on the football field. So according to Connor Hughes, you guys can see that little report on the screen, but the Athletics' Connor Hughes, who's actually a New York Jets reporter, has basically said all offseason that he doesn't believe it's long before Michael Carter could really eclipse this role as the team's main back, which for a fourth-round rookie to already be receiving these rave reviews out of training camp is something to monitor absolutely. So I think he's an intriguing prospect. I liked him coming to the draft, and in general, the Jets were stoked when this guy fell to their fourth round selection. You guys can see, but they basically said it was a long third round because they didn't have a third round pick, obviously, with the move up for Elijah Vera Tucker. So they had to wait that third round. But once he fell to that fourth round, as you guys can see, like they were ecstatic. They were through the moon. They view this guy as well worth the third round pick they would have been able to spend on him had they had their pick. So it's super interesting. I know there's going to be a lot of people breaking down, oh, he's still a fourth round pick. And I get that, but the team is ecstatic to get him there. We'll see how they use him, but I am absolutely optimistic as to what Michael Carter could be if he does receive that role that we expect. And as we'll get into with the competition in this backfield, I just don't view much in that regard at all whatsoever. I mean, let's talk about Tevin Coleman real quick. He might get the starting nod early. Let's be honest here. Maybe first couple of weeks, familiar with the Shanahan system. Maybe he is the number one back for the first couple of weeks. However, we're still talking about a 28-year-old back coming off of injury concerns these past couple years, who, as you guys can see on the screen, was one of the worst efficient runners in the league last year. I mean, we're talking about 2.7 yards per touch, 1.9 yards, true yards per carry, 98th in breakaway runs, 71st in evaded tackles, 105th in points added. Like, this is just a guy that was not the same back that we saw in the early Atlanta Falcons days, even in the early San Francisco 49ers days. I don't think Tevin Coleman has much left in the tank, which makes me even more optimistic for what Michael Carter could be able to do with his backfield. I mean, you're talking about the other cogs in this backfield. Ty Johnson, I mean, he could be a late round dart throw in a super deep redraft league, or if you're drafting a dynasty league right now, maybe he's going in the 21st, 22nd round. I wouldn't mind adding him in that type of scenario because I do think he's the second most talented back on this team. And then when we're mentioning LaMichael Pirine, I mean, this guy's probably going to get cut anyways. This is a new coaching regime. They have no commitment to LaMichael Pirine, and he showed nothing last year. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just let him grab another opportunity with another team. So talk about the one to own. If you guys haven't already been able to tell, it's pretty clear. Give me Michael Carter. I was a huge fan of him on film, and all the early signs suggest that, again, if not for week one, it won't be long before Carter can really eclipse that number one main back role and, in my opinion, thrive with it. As I mentioned earlier, his main success at UNC came in these wide zone type schemes. He's basically a perfect fit. We're talking about a guy that fits like a glove into the San Francisco run scheme. And while his current ADP is the highest, I think it is deserved considering the opportunity available to him and what I personally think the offense is capable of. Again, a lot of people just assume, oh, this is same old Jets. They're not going to do anything. I think this is going to be a very improved Jets offense, talking about that coaching staff, talking about the addition of Zach Wilson, the bolstering of the offensive line, and obviously the talent of Michael Carter in that running back room. I'm very excited. And again, you're currently getting this guy in the 8th, 9th round as your RB3, RB4. I think in the right situation, if he's able to develop into that main back, we could be talking about a guy who gives you fringe RB2 production going all the way in the 8th, 9th round. So I really do think he's a value at his current ADP. So if you're drafting right now and you're in Underdog and you're trying to make these Jet stacks, I am perfectly fine with taking Michael Carter, taking Zach Wilson later, and maybe an Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, and you have a good up-and-coming Jets offense, in my opinion, to stack up. So Absolutely. Who's the best ADP value? It's also Michael Carter. I just don't see any real threat in that backfield besides him. So overall, at your jet splurb, let's get into the next team. It might be a little more exciting. It might be a little bit more debatable, and that's going to be the Baltimore Ravens. So the current depth chart ADP, you guys can see on the screen, but J.K. Dobbins currently going off the board around the third round area, currently off the board. I believe that's the 32nd overall pick. And then following him, you got Gus Edwards and Justice Hill also being drafted from this backfield. So let's make that a situation. And everybody and their mother who's played in fantasy football, who's watched football, kind of knows so far the past few years, the Ravens have been the model franchise for running the football. And they combine both a blend of explosiveness with consistency with this run game. I mean, it's been an absolute marvel to watch Lamar Jackson, that run game, really thrive with Greg Roman over these past couple years. Let's talk about the situation, though. Mark Ingram vacates 72 rushing attempts and 8 targets from last year. So total 80 combined opportunities from last year, as well as 12 red zone rushing attempts from last year on one of the best offenses in the league. You guys can see the breakdown of the rushing stats in the red zone. J.K. Dobbins leading the group with 31. Gus Edwards not too far behind with 27. Both should receive a reasonable uptick with the departure of Mark Ingram this offseason. So talking about the offensive line, this is an offensive line that ended up replacing Orlando Brown with Alejandro Villanueva in the offseason. You guys can see that. Villanueva, Zeitler, Bozeman, Powers, and Stanley coming back from injury last year. It should be at minimum an average offensive line, which in the run game, probably one of the best units in the league. So we'll see how they transpire, but I really think the unit kind of depends on how Villanueva is able to transition to fill that departure of Orlando Brown. So yet to see, but I think they'll figure it out. This is a good coaching staff that can figure out what their offensive line is going to be capable of. Talking about the coaching staff, everybody knows the coaching tendencies, as I mentioned, but for obvious reasons, we'll just mention it. This is the highest run rate in neutral game script team in the NFL last year at 55%. 55% of the time in neutral game scripts, they were just running the ball. An absolutely absurd total. For reference, only them and the New England Patriots actually ran the ball more than they passed it last year. So it just kind of goes to show that this is a team that is committed to that run game. And as we'll get into with the running backs, I think all of them are the main two for the most part are going to both be very good contributors from a fantasy football standpoint. And you guys have definitely obviously seen a lot of our content around J.K. Dobbins already. I also really like Gus Edwards. So in addition to this highest run rate in neutral game script, they were also the 4th highest team in red zone run rate in the NFL this past year at 59%, trailing only the New England Patriots, LA Rams, Minnesota Vikings, and Carolina Panthers. So this is a team that is both running the ball in the midfield and running the ball when they get into the red zone. So we know what they're about. They want to establish that run. They want to really play a physical game. And guess what? Let's talk about the potential roles in this backfield. J.K. Dobbins, we saw what he was last year. I mean, I've brought it up in the ADP battles with him and DeAndre Swift. If you guys haven't already checked that video out, make sure you do so on this channel. I absolutely love the potential of J.K. Dobbins. We're talking about a guy who was a top 16 back last year on less than 200 touches. I think this is a guy that if he nears that 220, 230 opportunity type of plateau, we could be talking about a guy that can physically win you your leagues in the 3rd round. So I'm absolutely excited, and I do think they've kind of mentioned that they might fluctuate. They might give a little bit more of a passing game edge, especially with their recent moves, obviously bringing in Rashad Bateman in particular. If they were to do that, J.K. Dobbins is the most well-adept pass catcher in this backfield. So if he's getting more targets in addition to his ridiculous efficiency, we're talking about a 6 yards per touch back, only mimicked by David Johnson and Alvin Kamara in recent years, which we saw what they ended up turning into from a fantasy football standpoint. This is a guy that is going to give you a baseline with his efficiency, but if he does get that volume uptick, he could legitimately break fantasy football. I'm telling you that right now. So he's the perfect upside 3rd round pick, in my opinion, especially in tournaments. You don't just pick to finish 4th in your league, 5th in your league. This is a guy that is current 3rd round ADP. The risk is absolutely baked in with the upside that he could present. So I love J.K. Dobbins, and in general, give me that value all day, every day. This is a guy that you can take as an RB2, but has the upside to legitimately be a top-end RB1. Let's talk about Gus Edwards a little bit. I think at his current value, he's currently going off the board in the 11th round or so. I think he's a very good player at that pick. As we'll get into, he's going to be my best value from this backfield. And in general, as much as I love J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards is going to have a role in this team. Mentioned last year, 31 to 27 inside the 20 opportunities for both these guys. I think it's probably going to be maybe a little bit wider of a split. I think J.K. Dobbins is probably going to earn a little bit more. I still expect this guy to eclipse at minimum 25 red zone rushing attempts, which if he does that, you're currently getting him off the board about an RB5. He has the standalone value, and if anything were to happen to J.K. Dobbins, we're talking about a guy that can win you leagues. And we could mention Justice Hill. He's probably not going to do much. And obviously the final back of this backfield, Lamar Jackson. I'm just kidding, but he's going to be the main running back in this team, obviously, even though he is their quarterback. We already know that. Lamar Jackson, Konami code, he is an absolute game breaker, so we don't have to talk about him much when we're talking about the running back. So what to own? The answer is simple. It's J.K. Dobbins. We saw last year, J.K. Dobbins quite literally had one of the most efficient running back rookie seasons. And as I alluded to, only him, David Johnson, Alvin Kamara really eclipsed these plateaus. You guys should see that on the screen. I think he's in store for a huge bump in opportunity. And on this offense has a plausible case to lead the league in touchdowns. I'm not just talking about lead this second-year running back class in touchdowns. Lead the NFL in touchdowns. You heard that correctly. I would not be shocked if J.K. Dobbins is entering that area. He kind of reminds me from a situational standpoint to what Nick Chubb has been able to do with the Cleveland Browns. If he's able to get that slight bump in opportunities, get that slight bump in rushing attempts, the sky's the limit for him. And again, as I mentioned, who's the best ADP value? It's going to be Gus Bus. I mean, we're talking about a guy that had 157 opportunities in 2020 and was giving you RB3 production. He's probably going to be a TD-dependent RB3, RB4 type if Dobbins is on the field. But as I mentioned, we're talking about a potential league winner if anything were to happen to J.K. Dobbins. Similarly to how we value the Tony Pollards, the Alexander Madisons, I fully think that Gus Bus should be heading that tier because he gives you value on his own right, doesn't just depend on the fact that he needs the main back to go down. So anyways, we could go on to the next team, and that's going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars. As you guys can see on the screen, the current depth chart / ADP of these backs coming off the board. You got Travis Etienne leading that group, currently going off the board in the 5th, 6th round area. James Robinson following him up, and Carlos Hyde finishing it off. So the situation, they replaced Chris Thompson and add Travis Etienne through the draft and Carlos Hyde through free agency. And in general, this team didn't have a lot of volume inside an opposing team's 20-yard line, but the majority of said volume from last year went to James Robinson, who was a solid performer in this regard. He wasn't anything crazy, but he did a job. In terms of vacated volume, they vacate 7 rushing attempts and 20 targets from 2020, which obviously are both extremely low totals. So we'll see how they kind of divvy up the work between obviously the main 2 backs being Travis Etienne and James Robinson, as I will get into. So let's talk about the offensive line. It's not much better. Aside from standout center Brandon Linder, as you can see, PFF has a low grade on the rest of the units. I mean, Jawan Taylor and Cam Robinson in particular got very low grades, but you know what? AJ Khan and Andrew Norwell got both respectable grades. So we'll see how that interior is able to block it up for this team. However, given all the circumstances, this is a team last year that was starting Gardner Minshew and Jake Luton under center. They recently used the 1st overall pick on franchise quarterback Trevor Lawrence, who myself, the majority of people around the industry do believe that this has the potential talent, or he has the potential talent to end up being one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. We have seen when you get a transcendent quarterback, it transcends the whole offense. So we've yet to see how the impact's going to have on this team, but I do believe that the addition of Trevor Lawrence will make this a very respectable offense next year, given the fact that he's just that talented. He's just that dang good at football. The Jaguars, in my opinion, should be a much more competitive team and therefore hold more leads in 2021. I mean, it's pretty obvious. If you're a better team, you're going to be holding more leads. You're going to be running the ball more. I mean, it's science, which will allow them to deploy a more consistent run game. Again, we got Darrell Bevell coming in from the Detroit Lions last year, who ranked 11th in neutral game script run play rate the past 2 years with the Lions. So overall, as we'll get into with coaching tendencies, Darrell Bevell should increase this team's neutral game run script percentages from last year, because as we see for the team last year, they were a more higher pass rate percentage team comparatively to what Bevell should bring in. So we've yet to see what this offense will look like, but I do think they're going to have more of a focus on running the football, especially to ease their young quarterback in. So we'll see how it happens, but let's break down the potential roles. James Robinson, it's clear as day to me. He is the 1B/banger role in this offense. That 85.2% opportunity share he had last year is not only a lock to go down, we may flat out see it cut in half. That's how good of a player Travis Etienne is, as we'll get into. But if you're drafting James Robinson with any type of expectation based off what he did last year, I got sour news for you. I think he's a fine player, but he was easily one of the most situationally dependent running backs in the entire NFL last year. And again, with that major added competition, we're not talking about a 4th round pick. We're not talking about a $2 million free agency. We're talking about, or a free agent. We're talking about a freaking 25th overall pick used on Travis Etienne, who myself and many in this industry believe is a much more talented back than what James Robinson is. I see his role diminishing completely. I mean, I think he deserves to be in the Ronald Jones, James Conner area, yet he's currently going off the board about 20 spots higher than them. Urban Meyer has already told reporters he's confident with Robinson and Hyde filling that role as downhill 1-2 runners, with Travis being the guy they use in a multitude of facets. What that tells me is, you know what? We have a couple bangers on the team. We're just going to interchange them. Travis Etienne's going to be the guy who gets all the worthy touches. So I don't know about James Robinson, man. I'm nervous. I mean, they brought Carlos Hyde in, who's already familiar with the team. He's already familiar with the head coach, with Urban Meyer. So we'll see how that role gets divvied up. But James Robinson, for all you zero RB truthers thinking that, oh, maybe I'm getting a back end RB2 with this guy, I just don't see it whatsoever. Again, he had 96% of the team running back carries in the 14 games he played last year, which is most in the NFL. For reference, Christian McCaffrey saw a 93% share in his historic 2019. James Robinson had a higher running back carry rate than Christian McCaffrey in his record-breaking year. That is just insane to me. But anyways, enough of slandering James Robinson. You guys already know our displeasure, our distaste with him already. Let's get into Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne has actually been one of the most efficient red zone backs we've seen in college football over the last 3 years. You guys can see it on the screen, but inside the 10-yard line, 18 rushing attempts, 8 touchdowns, a 45% touchdown rate in 2020. Inside the 20, 23 attempts converted into 10 touchdowns. In addition, he had 26 attempts, 9 touchdowns, and 11 tackles broken in 2019. So this is an efficient back that knows how to find the end zone, similarly to what we've seen in recent years with how Aaron Jones has been playing with the Packers. People want to run this stigma that, oh, these smaller backs are never going to be goal line backs, yada, yada, yada. Well, guess what? Travis Etienne, like Aaron Jones, knows how to find that end zone. So we should see what happens here. But in addition to being a very efficient red zone rusher, this is also a back that led college football in receptions this past season and has already worked extensively in the receiving game this offseason and unites with his quarterback in college the third down role that is his going into this season. As you guys can see on the screen, Meyer has always had a strong belief with speed. He wants his offenses to be fast. Guess what? Travis Etienne may very well be the fastest running back in this class. Adding his speed to this team gives them a completely different dimension from what they had last year with James Robinson. So overall, I do think Travis Etienne, as we'll get into, is the back to own. But let's talk about Carlos Hyde. Again, he's more of a fodder back. He should work in with James Robinson, maybe a 7 to 9 touch per game guy at max. I don't think he earns any other type of role aside from maybe that, again, at max. So the one to own is Travis Etienne. It's not close. This is a guy that can do it in all ways, has efficiency in the red zone while also being by far the most accomplished receiving back on this team. And who's the best ADP value? Well, Travis Etienne at his current ADP is the only one I feel even worthy of being drafted. So he's going to be the best value at ADP. Again, I'm not going to take Carlos Hyde in my drafts. Maybe later on, if anything were to happen to James Robinson, you might pick him up off the wire, but he has value. Does he really have that much value going into the season? I don't really think so. Obviously, as I mentioned with James Robinson, I'm much lower on him than consensus. So therefore, Travis Etienne is the one to own and the best ADP value in my opinion. But we can get on to the final team of the video, and that is going to be the Denver Broncos. Again, we're talking about a team that drafted their next Nick Chubb, as we'll get into. But the current depth chart in ADP, you guys can see it on the screen. Javonte Williams currently finding himself at that 61st overall pick, followed by Melvin Gordon and Mike Boone being the other draftable backs, according to Underdog Fantasy ADP. So, with the Broncos, the situation, they add their next Nick Chubb, as I mentioned, with Javonte Williams, and actually traded up ahead of the Miami Dolphins in order to do so. When we're breaking down the situation from last year, as you guys can see on the screen with their red zone distribution, Melvin Gordon led this unit with 29 attempts and 8 touchdowns with a 55% success rate, while it's dark green, as you can see. According to the rest of the NFL, it wasn't really that great of a figure. Philip Lindsay, 7 attempts, 0 touchdowns, 43% success rate, just non-existent. And Royce Freeman turned 3 attempts into 0 touchdowns with a 0% success rate. So, yikes, this team was not able to really establish the running game in the red zone. Well, guess what? Javonte Williams, with his tackle-breaking ability, with his elusiveness, as we'll get into, should change that figure day one, to be honest. So, overall, let's break down the offensive line a little bit. Again, as you can see, standout performer on the left side. Garrett Bowles was the 3rd-rated tackle according to Pro Football Focus. Rounding out that rest of the offensive line, we got Dalton Risner, solid contributor. Lloyd Cushenberry, who was actually the last graded center in the league last year. So we'll see what happens. He was a rookie last year. Maybe he takes a step up. Graham Glasgow and Bobby Massey, I believe. So overall, probably about an average offensive line unit. We'll see how Garrett Bowles can really honestly carry that unit. In terms of the coaching tendencies, you guys can see it on the screen, but they were actually last year the 7th highest red or neutral game script running rate in the entire NFL. So it kind of goes to show that they were running the ball. They had 2 backs that they were confident in, with Philip Lindsay and Melvin Gordon in particular, and they were running the ball. Guess what, though? Philip Lindsay leaves in the offseason. They add a much-needed upgrade at their number 1 overall position, in my opinion, with Javonte Williams, my 3rd overall back in the class, a guy that I had a fringe 1-2 on. I do think that he can step in right away and be that really, really efficient tackle-breaking runner. So let's break down the rules, because I basically already alluded to it. Javonte Williams, this is the 1A back. You guys saw it when he got drafted by this team. They were excited. They were ecstatic. They believed they were getting their next Nick Chubb, Ezekiel Elliott between the tackles runner. And when you're evaluating Javonte Williams both on film and of his efficiency metrics from last year, it's not hard to see why. Again, 215.4 PFF elusiveness rating last year basically broke the system. And get this, 46.96% of his runs, he avoided a tackle. Both by far number 1 in the class. Again, we're talking about a guy that is elusive and breaks tackles like nobody's freaking business. Does that remind you of anybody? Yes, Nick Chubb. I said it a lot of times already in this video. Javonte Williams could be the next Nick Chubb. We're talking about a guy, 4.59 yards after contact per attempt, 3rd in the class, and 17.2% of his runs went for 15 plus yards, which was number 2 in the draft class and number 2 in the country, behind only his teammate at North Carolina, Michael Carter, who we already talked about, another guy I was very high on. He profiles as an elite workhorse running back between the tackles runner with versatility really to contribute as a receiver. I mean, we saw it last year. They used these backs interchangeably at North Carolina, both showing very good flashes. Obviously, Michael Carter a little bit more so in the receiving game. I do think Javonte Williams can be a 3-down back given his skill set. Talk about Melvin Gordon. I do think he could be the 1B back for the majority of the season, but maybe he starts off as the 1A back maybe the first 4 or 5 weeks as Javonte Williams is getting really figuring into the NFL. And the other backs on the roster, Mike Boone and Royce Freeman, I just believe that they're fodder backs. Mike Boone maybe earns a little bit of a role in the receiving game as Javonte Williams adjusts, as Melvin Gordon may not show it in the 3-down capacity. But overall, I'm not really drafting either of those guys. Want to own. If I haven't already made it clear, Javonte Williams, I view this as a similar situation to that of the Baltimore Ravens last year, with what seemed like an incumbent starter in Mark Ingram, with an exciting young rookie in J.K. Dobbins coming back just last year. We could be looking at a similar case with Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams, only the public is smarter now. The public knows you take the young back that the team spent recent draft capital on ahead of the incumbent starter. So I do think that their ADPs are both very appropriate, but again, this is the one to own. This team has already come out and said, as I mentioned, this is their next Nick Chubb. This is their next Ezekiel Elliott type of runner. They could not believe that he even fell to them at that top of the second round, which kind of goes to show you both their value of him and their expected NFL value of him, what they thought the rest of the league would value him at. These claims are clearly validated. I mean, they wouldn't have traded up ahead of Miami if they didn't firmly believe that Miami was going to pick Javonte Williams had he fallen. They just went out and secured their guy, quite frankly. And people want to say, oh, don't draft the running backs highly. When you have a first-round grade on that type of runner like a Javonte Williams, you go up, you get your guy. I view this as being a timeshare, as I mentioned at start, but I do believe that Javonte, with his talent, with his versatility, will end up separating himself as the season goes on, and we could be talking about the next Cam Akers type of player, which we saw Cam Akers last year was always the most talented back in the backfield. Well, maybe struggled at the beginning of the season, but once he came on and you had him those last 5-6 weeks of the season, this is a legit league winner. Javonte Williams going at the 6th round could potentially win you your leagues. And again, if we're talking about dynasty, you currently can get him at a low RB2 cost of acquisition in dynasty drafts. This is a guy that I wouldn't be shocked is firmly entrenched in my top 12 going into 2022 and beyond. So I love his value. Who's the best ADP play? Absolutely Javonte Williams, still in my opinion, for a back going in the 6th round. I think he has ability, again, to win your leagues. You could take him as your RB3. Let's say you pair up CMC and Antonio Gibson in the first 2 rounds, hypothetically. And you're able to take this guy as your RB3 in the 6th round. You're absolutely riling up your leagues at that point. So overall, love Javonte Williams from this backfield. Let's talk about the honorable mentions of the AFC. We can mention the Cleveland Browns a little bit. Nothing really too hard to discuss here. It's not murky. We know what's going to happen. Nick Chubb is one of the best pure runners in the NFL, if not the number 1 best in the league, and should figure as this team's workhorse and main back on 1st and 2nd down and on the goal line. Whereas Kareem Hunt should be making his dues in rotation, as well as being the team's main 3rd down back. And obviously, as we all know, presents elite upside if Chubb were to go down at any point, as he showed last year. He was an RB1 in the games that Nick Chubb missed. Buffalo Bills. All signs have been pointing all offseason to Zach Moss supplanting Devin Singletary as the Bills' main number 1 back. And based on 2020 play and lead back profiles, I would also lean Moss to take this role on one of the highest powered offenses in the entire league. Miami Dolphins, if Gaskin is on the field, I do believe and expect him to be this team's main bell cow, workhorse, whatever you want to call it, back, based off the percentages that we saw with him on the field last year. They were using it at about a 90% usage rate, which was one of the highest in the league. When healthy, I think he will eclipse over 60% in snaps in every single game this upcoming year, and should figure into this role once again this year if he is healthy. I do believe he's going to be able to encapsulate what he was able to do last year. His main source of competition, in my opinion, would come mostly from Salvon Ahmed and Jared Dokes, a 7th round pick from Cincinnati. And finally, we could talk about the last team, the run heaviest team in the entire NFL last year, 2nd in neutral game scripts, the New England Patriots. And let's talk first about Damian Harris. I do think that if this guy is on the field, this is going to be the team's main workhorse back. We saw it multiple times, 1st and 2nd down. By the end of the year, this was a guy that was averaging about 72 rushing yards per game over those 8 weeks between week 7 and 14 when he was fully healthy. So we should see what happens, but I do believe that he really earned his role and earned Bill Belichick's trust as that team's main 1st and 2nd down back. James White, he should see a significant uptick in targets if Mac Jones is named the target or the starter. Last year, 62 targets in 2020 after back-to-back years, the 2 years prior, of 95 and 123 targets respectively. I do think if Mac Jones is the starter, obviously, again, with Rex Burkhead leading as well, I do think that James White has that 3rd down role basically locked in. But if Damian Harris is able to earn any of that, we could be talking about a potential RB2 archetype going off the board in around the 7th, 8th round area. So I like both these backs at value. But with that being said, if you guys made it this far in the video and you enjoy, make sure you comment down below. Javonte Williams is the next Nick Chubb, because I don't know how many times I said it this video, but I firmly believe that if he gets that opportunity, he's got the talent, he's got the elusiveness, he's got the efficiency to really encapsulate that role. But again, if you guys enjoy content like this, as I mentioned, please leave a like button. It helps us grow up in those YouTube algorithms. And yeah, we'll see you tomorrow. We'll see you later this week. We're going to be coming out with the fire content as always. Make sure you guys stay tuned. Peace out, y'all. It's your boy Danny. Take care.